Welcome all. So today we are going to talk about Chapter 1 CBSE 12th Standard, that is the reproduction in organisms. So in today's session we are going to talk about introduction to reproduction, what is asexual reproduction, what is sexual reproduction. Alright, so yes, before that, if you didn't subscribe our channel, please do subscribe and press the bell icon for further updates. We'll move on to the session. So first we have to know what is lifespan. So you can split it into two, life and the span. Span, so what do you call it as span? The amount of time. Next is life. So which means that the period from birth to natural death. So here you have to know the point, natural death. So an individual which is born and dies naturally, it has to die naturally, and that is called is this individual's lifespan. When an individual dies in accident or due to disease, that is not included in an individual's lifespan. It has to attain its natural end of the life's process. Yes. Now in lifespan, there's an important characteristic where the size of an individual is not proportional to its lifespan, which means that elephant is really a bulky animal, right? It lives for 70 years. But parakeet is a very tiny bird, but look at its lifespan, it lives for 140 years. Alright, next in flies, if you want to compare butterfly and fruit fly, butterfly has only 1 to 2 weeks of its lifespan, and butterfly is really huge than a fruit fly, right? So its lifespan is just 40 to 50 days. Next is a rose plant and a rice plant. Rose plant is comparatively smaller to the rice plant. So rose plant grows only for 8 years, so it ends its lifespan in 8 years. But rice plant has only 4 months of its lifespan. So from this you can come to a conclusion that the size of an individual is no way related to the lifespan, right? So we humans live only for 70 to 90 years, you can say, a normal lifespan. But you can imagine banyan tree, 200, and it goes on for years, 300, 400, depends. But average lifespan of a banyan tree is just 200 to 250 years, right? So this size is no way related to its lifespan. Next, we have to talk, and the important characteristics of a living organism is reproduction. And production. It has to produce again to continue its own generation, to continue its own progeny. So reproduction is the organism gives birth to its offspring, that is the younger generation, right? Mom gives birth to her child. That child grows up, gives birth to another child, and that child. So the progeny continues. So in reproduction, we have two types of reproduction. One is asexual, the other is sexual. So first, asexual. A means anything which is devoid. So asexual means it is devoid of the sexual reproduction. And sexual, which involves the fusion of the male and the female gametes. And next, in asexual reproduction, we have two important characteristics. It does not include gametes. So there is no gametes. And there is no fusion of the male and the female gametes. So probably in asexual reproduction, there is only one individual that acts as both of the parent. For example, binary fission in amoeba. So amoeba is a single parent and it gives rise to two identical daughter cells. So amoeba does not undergo meiotic division because they do not have a gamete. So they undergo a basic cell division. Alright, and now in asexual reproduction, you have cell division, that is amitotic and mitotic cell division. In these two different types of cell division, there is 2n number of chromosomes, that is diploid number of chromosomes. And in sexual reproduction, you have the gametes. For example, when you take humans, the male gamete is a sperm and the female gamete is the egg. Sperm is a haploid gamete. An egg is an haploid gamete. Now what happens? These two haploid gametes fuse together. So there's syngamy, which means there is fertilization or the copulation that takes place, and they form a zygote which is 2n in number, that is diploid in number. And then again they go cell division. So what are the different types of cell division? Where mitotic cell division, where a single cell divides into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 16 cells. So that's how the cells divide, and it undergoes different types of stages in cell division, that is blastula, gastrula, and all these morula, and then there is offspring. Alright, and now this offspring undergoes non-Mendelian inheritance. That is, the offspring has a phenotype. So what do we mean by phenotype here? Is the physical character. So the physical character resembles both of the parents, but the genotype, the general character, the physiology resembles a single parent. That is, the genetic makeup resembles only a single parent, and mostly it is the mother, right? And yes, and then in cell division you have mitotic cell division, right? And mitotic cell division, there is first K and then it is followed by C. That is, karyokinesis is followed by cytokinesis, right? So karyokinesis is followed by cytokinesis. So karyokinesis K, which means the division of the nucleus, and cytokinesis C, the division of the cell, that is the cytoplasm and the cytoplasmic contents. Alright, so in this session we spoke what is reproduction and a brief introduction on what is sexual and what is asexual reproduction. In next session we'll deal about the different types of asexual reproduction in animals. Thank you. Friends, so in today's session we'll continue with Chapter 1, Reproduction in Organisms. So last class we saw introduction to reproduction in organisms and an introduction about what is sexual reproduction and what is asexual reproduction. So in today's class we're going to talk about what is asexual reproduction and the different types of asexual reproduction in animals. And before that, if you didn't subscribe our channel, please do subscribe. Don't forget to press the bell icon for further updates. So we'll move on to the session. So now asexual reproduction, we know asexual, which means it does not involve the formation of gametes as well as the fusion of gametes. And now we're going to talk about 6 important types of asexual reproduction. In that, first is fission reaction. So what is fission reaction? Where a single parent is been divided into 2 daughter cells, and that is called as fission, where in an organism there is a slit or a cut in between. It could be an horizontal cut or it could be a vertical cut, or there is no plane of division, but there are daughter cells which has been formed. So that is fission. So in binary fission, bi means 2, where the daughter cells are from equal plane and the daughter cells are from unequal plane. So let me explain further. Now first is equal halves. For example, when you take amoeba, in times of binary fission, there is no plane of division in amoeba, where amoeba splits into equal halves. So there is identical daughter cells, right? But in case of yeast, budding is the form of binary fission in yeast. So there is a oval E cells, there is a formation of bud, and this bud detaches from the E cells, and now there are 2 daughter cells where one is a smaller daughter cell when you compare it with the other. Next is encystation, which means there is a formation of cyst or a hard layer around a cell. Now in case of amoeba, during, so basically amoeba divides by binary fission. But during unfavorable condition, which means the environment which is not suitable for amoeba, during such times amoeba develops a layer, 3-layer proteinaceous layer around them, and this is called as cyst. And this cyst is in protective envelope, and it's really hard to break for the other predators, for the other organisms. So now what happens during this unfavorable condition? There is a lot of amoebial cell multiplication, and these cells are called as pseudopodiospores. SEU, pseudo, podio and spores. So these smaller amoeboid cells are called as pseudopodio cells. And now the formation of these pseudopodio cells, spores, is a result of what? The burst of these amoeba, encysted amoeba, and this process is called as sporulation. So sporulation, and this term is basically associated with multiple fission, where there is single parent and there are many number of daughter cells. So you can refer it as sporulation, and this is possible only in times of multiple fission. Alright, and next is zoospores. So in case of algae, so algae basically divides by zoospores, where there is an algal cell and there is a multiplication of algal cell inside the mother algae. Now what happens? This mother algae, they burst and form spores which genetically identical to the mother algae. And when these cells are motile, which means when these cells have flagella for swimming, they are called as zoospores. And when these cells are devoid of the flagella, and you call these cells as aplanospores, which is devoid of flagella. Next, we're going to talk about conidiophores or hyalospores. And now in case of penicillium, so penicillium, there are different species of penicillium, Penicillium notatum, Penicillium chrysogenum, and they are the reason for the antibiotics which we use today, penicillin, right? So that penicillium we're going to talk about. And there's a stalk, and this structure is called as conidia, and these conidia produce small spores called as conidiospores. And now each of these conidiophores, and now conidiophores is also called as hyalospores. In most of the books, hyalospores is been referred, but you can also call it as conidiospores because they are placed above the conidial region. Alright, and now each of these spores wither and they start developing a new hyphae and an individual penicillium colony, and that is conidiopores. Next is budding, which we learned from our 6th grade, is a form of asexual reproduction in Hydra, where budding, there is a new baby Hydra which has been formed. And now there is fragmentation, that is the baby Hydra, the bud is been cut off and it swims for a shorter distance, find the suitable substratum and settles. And now this type of asexual reproduction is called as budding. Alright, and now in this region, after every 2 hours, Hydra undergoes this type of budding. Alright, and now 6th type is sponge. It undergoes an asexual reproduction called as gemmules. So you call it as gemmules of sponge. Now what happens? There is a sponge. It belongs to porifera, right? So there is a sponge and it has been attached to the substratum, right? And now what happens? Inside these sponges, there is a vegetative structure which is formed, and you call it as gemmules. And each of these gemmules is spherical in shape and they measure up to 2 millimeter in size, right? And now they have spicules all over their body as means of protection, and the inner core has archaeocytes, and these archaeocytes are the energy reservoirs. They store energy for the proper functioning of these gemmules. And then there is a micropyle where there is entry and exit of the food. Alright, and now when there is a favorable condition, each of these gemmule will detach from the mother sponge and they search a suitable substratum and form a separate colony. So in today's class, we saw about asexual reproduction and different types of asexual reproduction in animals. In next class, we'll talk about different types of asexual reproduction in plants, which is also called as vegetative propagation. Thank you. Hello friends, in last class we spoke about the different means of asexual reproduction in animals, and today's class we'll deal about the asexual reproduction, the means of asexual reproduction in plants. So when plants reproduce asexually, you call it as vegetative propagation, which means they do not involve the ovary and the anther. Alright, so devoid of these two gametes, when a plant reproduces, you call it as the plant is reproduced through vegetative propagation. So before that, if you didn't subscribe our channel, please do subscribe and press the bell icon for further updates. We'll move on to the session. Yes, we spoke what is vegetative reproduction, and in today's class we'll deal about 6 important types of vegetative propagation: runners, rhizome, sucker, tuber, offset, and leaf buds. Alright, so first we'll talk about runners. Example, the plants from grass family. Now there is a slender stem which grows horizontally, which means imagine there is a grass, alright, and this is the soil and there is roots of grass. Now what happens? The grass, there is a single stem, it grows horizontally. And now here there is a formation of root and a new grass. Alright, and now this slender stem growing horizontally, there is a slender stem growing horizontally called as runners. So it is resembling like as if a part of it is running and forming another grass. So they are called as runners. Alright. Next is rhizome. Example, ginger, where there is a formation of new buds and they develop adventitious root. This you can observe in your day-to-day life, where for example you get a ginger and you don't use, never keep it in the refrigerator. Keep it outside and do not use it for 1.5 weeks. And now observe what happens. Now there's ginger. There's ginger. Alright. Now imagine there's a piece of ginger this way. Now there is a formation of new buds. Alright. And now this is a new bud. And this new bud is pale green in color. Right? And now what happens when you keep this ginger in the soil? These pale green buds, they start developing adventitious roots. Okay? And now there's a formation of a new ginger plant. Right? Yes. Next is sucker. So this is predominantly seen in banana family, where this is a banana plant. Right? This is a banana plant. And now you would have seen how a number of bananas are being formed through vegetative propagation. You just plant a banana, wait for 6 to 8 months. And now what happens? There are new baby bananas, new plantlets which sprout from the old roots. Alright. So from a single root from the old plant, there's a formation of a new banana plant. So you would have observed in a center old banana plant, there would be like 4 to 5 of the baby banana plants which has been sprouted from the old roots, and that is called as sucker. Sucker, which means that a new plant, they suck nutrients from the mother plant during its younger stage of life, and then they try to live independently and produce a new banana generation. Next is tuber. So you can see it in potato families where there is a germination of eye buds. It is almost like ginger. The same way there is a potato and new baby potato buds are being formed. So when you place it in the soil, and even this is pale green in color. So when you keep it in the soil, it sprouts into a new potato plant, right? Next is offset. Offset resembles the runners, right? And runners you can observe in terrestrial plants, the plants which grow on the land. And offset you can view it in water plants. So in water hyacinth, what happens? The same way the offset grows horizontally. So this is a water hyacinth, the same way there's a stem that grows horizontally, and this stem they call it as offset. And there is new hyacinth family, right? And now a minute difference is that this is a terrestrial plant and this is aquatic water dwelling plant. And the last is leaf buds in biophyllum. So in biophyllum, when you observe the plant, each of the leaf margin there is a formation of leaflets, a very tiny leaflet, and each of these leaflets they develop adventitious root. And now when these leaflets fall off to the ground, there is a new biophyllum which has been grown. The same way there's again the biophyllum, they start developing these leaflets and the adventitious root, and again this adventitious root along with the leaflet will fall on. Again there's a new family which has been developed. Alright, so in today's session we spoke about the different means of vegetative propagation in plants. In next class we'll talk about what is sexual reproduction and what are the stages of sexual reproduction. Thank you friends. So last class we dealt about the asexual reproduction in plants, that is vegetative propagation, and now in today's session we are going to talk about sexual reproduction, what is sexual reproduction and the different stages of sexual reproduction. Before that, if you didn't subscribe our channel, please do subscribe and press the bell icon for further updates. We'll move on to the session. And now as we know, what is a sexual reproduction, which involves gametes, the male gametes and the female gametes, and both of these gametes will fuse together for the future progeny. And now when you take in case of humans, there is a male gamete which is sperm and there is a female gamete which is egg and the ovum. So they both undergo syngamy, which means the fertilization, and then the zygote starts developing and then there is a offspring. So all these, the stages, now what exactly happens in fertilization and the post fertilization, we will see it in the next session. And today's class we will deal with pre-fertilization. So before that we will talk about the phases of growth. And now we have three important phases of growth. Be it a plant or animal or whatever, there are three stages of growth. The first is a vegetative phase or a juvenile phase. So juvenile phase means a baby phase, right after the baby is born. Alright, so this is called as a vegetative phase, where there is no sexual reproduction in this phase, where there is a lot of growth, hormonal changes and development takes place in vegetative phase. Next is the reproductive or the sexual phase. In this type of sexual phase, there is a maturation of the male and the female secondary sexual character. So in case of male, so we saw like in the adolescence phase, so what did we see? There is a change in the masculine tone, like the body gets more gigantic and shapier, there's a growth of beard, mush and whatever, all the secondary sexual characters and the sexual characters. In case of female, what happens when she attains puberty? There is a menstrual cycle where she starts bleeding. So the same way animals also undergo estrous cycle, few of the animals. And in normal human menstrual cycle, you have what? The menstrual, where there's a bleeding phase, the follicular phase where the egg prepares itself for maturation, there's ovulation. the egg is ovulated, the egg is been secreted, then the luteal phase. Again it is followed by the menstrual phase every 28 to 35 days. The same way in animals, there is no menstrual phase or the ovulatory phase. Rather, there is only two phases, that is the follicular and the luteal phase. And thirdly, we will talk about the senile phase. So in senile phase, there is no reproduction, sexual reproduction, and it is almost the stage where they are nearing to their lifespan, nearing to one's death, and that you call it as senile phase. And now in this reproductive phase, we are going to talk about three important stages in fertilization. The pre-fertilization. What is pre-fertilization? The term pre, anything happens before the fertilization, and that is called as pre-fertilization. In pre-fertilization, there is a maturation of the male and the female gametes, and now these gametes are ever ready to undergo syngamy, to fuse with each other, and this is what happens in the pre-fertilization. Now in pre-fertilization, you have gametogenesis and the gamete formation. Gametogenesis. So genesis means formation or something related with production, right? And then gamete formation is where the gamete is really ready to fuse with each other. So in this is called as pre-fertilization. Next is fertilization. So during fertilization, what happens? There is syngamy, and then post-fertilization, after that syngamy, there is the developmentary stages of a zygote. So all that we will see in this fertilization. Alright, and now today we are specifically talking about the types of gametes and the sexuality. Now there are two important types of gametes, isogametes and heterogametes. Iso, which means same. You can never differentiate between the male and the female gamete, and you call it as isogamete. For example, in algae, and now both are similar in shape as well as structure, but one is a male gamete and the other is a female gamete. Now you can never differentiate between the male and the female gametes. See, both of the gametes are similar in size and structure. So this is called isogamete. Next is heterogametes. We have, like in humans, you have the egg, which is spherical, and the sperm, alright, which has what? A flagella for motility, a tail for motility, and this is a stationary object, they can never move, but sperm is the motile object, so they move, they swim to fuse with the ovum, so that is called as heterogametes. So both of these gametes are different and you call it as heterogametes. Next, sexuality. So in terms of plant, you call it as bisexual plant and a unisexual plant. In a bisexual plant, both the sexes are there in a same flower. So where there is an ovary and there is an anther, right? Yes. You have style as well as a pistil. So that is called as a bisexual flower. And this bisexual, you can also call it as homothallic and monoecious. So do not confuse with the term, all these three terms, bisexual, homothallic and monoecious, all means the same thing. Next is a unisexual flower, where there is a separate male flower and there is a separate female flower, right? And that you also call as a heterothallic or dioecious. So next we will move on to the sexuality, the unisexual and the bisexual. So unisexual, we have humans, we have male, female, males that produce sperm and female which produces egg, right? So that is unisexual. And in bisexual, when you see leeches, earthworms, the both of their sexes, you call it as hermaphrodite animals, where both of the sexes are seen in the same animal, alright? And that you call it as a bisexual or an hermaphrodite animal. So in today's session, we spoke about the stages of sexual reproduction and we dealt with the pre-fertilization stage. In next class, we'll talk about the fertilization and the post-fertilization stage. Thank you. And so last session we dealt about what is reproduction and the 3 stages of reproduction. We also finished seeing what is pre-fertilization stage. And in today's session we'll talk about what happens during a fertilization and what happens during after the fertilization, that is the post-fertilization stage. So before that, if you didn't subscribe our channel, please do subscribe and press the bell icon for further updates. So we'll move on to the session. So fertilization and then post-fertilization events we are going to talk today. And now what is fertilization? There is a fusion of gametes, right? And you call it as syngamy. In syngamy, there is a separate male gamete which is haploid. There is a separate female gamete which is haploid, and both of them fuse together to form a diploid zygote. And this is what happens during the process of fertilization. But this fertilization could happen internally and externally. Internally, that is inside the body, and externally, which happens outside the body. And now when you take an example of humans, there is a separate male and a female, and this fusion happens inside the female's body, and you call it as internal fertilization, which is inside the body. But in case of frogs, toads and fishes, this type of syngamy or the fusion, it happens outside the body. For example, when you talk, there is a female frog and it lays its eggs in the water body, and there is a male frog which ejaculates its sperm. Alright, and now what happens? This sperm is motile, right? It can swim, and this sperm can swim and fuse with the egg to form a zygote. And now the post-fertilization event. So after this sperm is being fused with the egg, now there is a formation of the larval stages also inside the water body. So all these events happens outside the body, and you call it as external fertilization. And in few of the fishes and frog, there is something called as parental care. They exhibit parental care. They care their offspring. So they care all these larval stages until they achieve a stage where they can move out independently. Alright, and now next we'll move on to the post-fertilization events. So now what happens after the zygote? There is always the birth of an offspring, a juvenile, a baby. And now this could happen in oviparous, oviviparous or ovoviviparous. Now when an animal lays eggs and it starts incubating its eggs, and that is called as oviparous. Alright, eggs. The young ones gets hatched from the eggs, and you call it as oviparous. Next, viviparous, when an organism gives rise to young ones, like there is a birth, right? In case of humans and all, most of the members of mammalian family, there is a formation of young ones, direct delivery into a juvenile baby. Next, you call it as ovoviviparous, where after the copulation, so the offspring, they grow inside the egg, and these eggs are broken down inside the animals. So when you take snakes, anaconda snakes, what happens? Now these snakes, they yield 40 to 100 juveniles at a time. Now what happens? These baby snakes, they grow inside the tummy in the egg. Alright, now during the time of during the time of parturition or the delivery, or just before the delivery, these offspring, they hatch from the egg and they come out as a normal baby anacondas. Alright, now what happens? These eggs, the only difference between these oviparous and oviviparous is that these juveniles hatch inside the mother's womb, right? And then they come out as a normal offspring. So in today's session, we spoke about what is fertilization and now what happens in a post-fertilization. And now we're going to deal with a very important term called as parthenogenesis. And now in this parthenogenesis, is a type of sexual reproduction, but there is no fusion of gametes, and you call this term as apomixis. Now what happens generally in female turkeys or honeybees, there is a haploid gametes. Two of the haploid gametes fuse together to form a diploid zygote, and then there is a production of offspring. There is no separate a male gamete or a female gamete, and this you call it as parthenogenesis. And now there is apomixis. So the term apomixis means doubling of the haploid cells. So you can expect this type of MCQs in your NEET. So apomixis involves doubling of haploid, doubling of diploid, or doubling of the normal cells, and none of these. So you can write doubling of the haploid cell, single haploid plus another haploid to form 2n in number. So you can see in turkeys, honeybees, and the other organisms. So in next class we'll start with a new chapter. Thank you.